And thanks so much to the Chamber for hosting once again a fantastic event, and it's a treat to be a part of it. I get the pleasure of introducing Heather. I've been asked to just a couple of introductory comments. I am with Suncor Energy, which of course includes Petro-Canada. I think for the topic today, important to mention the fact that that includes the Petro-Canada Electric Highway with our fast charging stations all across the country. There's that, but the really big issue that we're dealing with is net zero. And I am proud of the fact that Suncor is a founding member of the Pathways to Net Zero Alliance among all of the oil sands companies. Listen, needless to say, oil sands, we're kind of a big part of the challenge in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And we're really, really excited. This was announced last June, really excited to be a part of the solution. It's not going to be easy. And it's going to take an awful lot of collaboration among companies, among governments, but we know this is our future, and it's a really exciting time to be involved in it. Canada's net zero future. This is not easy for any part of this country, and I think one of the challenges that we face as a country is the fact that we are so big. Unlike a country like Norway, where it's pretty small, pretty consistent when it comes to geography and geology and approach. We are very diverse. We are very diverse, as everyone knows on this call. We're very diverse in terms of geography. We're very diverse in terms of geologies. We're very diverse in terms of economics and economies. We're very diverse in terms of our histories. And all of that makes a Canadian approach to net zero, frankly, a Canadian approach to a lot of things, but Canadian approach to net zero, not easy, but certainly not a challenge that is beyond this country's capabilities. And so I'm really, really pleased to introduce Heather Chalmers. Heather, among other things, is in fact the co-chair of the the Canadian Chamber of Commerce's Net Zero Council, co-chairing with Matthew Wetmore. But I'm going to actually read this, because if I don't read, Heather, I'm going to miss half of your bio. So bear with me. Heather Chalmers is the president and CEO of GE Canada, and also president for GE Healthcare Canada. GE Canada has produced industrial solutions for over 128 years and employs thousands of Canadians across multiple sectors. Heather is passionately committed to leading businesses that consistently deliver Canadian innovation and outcomes to customers in Canada and globally. As of 2018, Heather leads GE Canada as they work to serve customer needs in the aviation, healthcare, power, and renewable energy sectors. So I'm not sure when you sleep, Heather. That's a pretty daunting portfolio. The focuses of these businesses, along with government leaders, includes climate change, of course, but also digital, AI, and additive manufacturing. And throughout her extensive 25-year career with GE, Heather has consistently developed and led high-performing teams that are industry leaders in bringing innovative technology and digital solutions to solve complex challenges in both Canadian and global markets. Heather holds a chemical engineering degree from Queen's, an MBA from Rotman, is on the board of directors of CD Howe, the Ontario Brain Institute, St. Elizabeth Health Foundation as well. And she is also a member of the Business Council of Canada, Rotman School of Management's Healthcare and Life Sciences Advisory Council, and is part of the GTA United Way Cabinet and former director of the MedTech Canada Board. And as I mentioned, also, I've had the distinct pleasure of working with Heather on the Net Zero Council with the Canadian Chamber. And as we have discussed recently, Heather, this is such a challenge for this country. There are very different opinions in different places for different reasons. It's not that anybody's wrong or right, but an awful lot of different people are coming to the table with different challenges, different goals, different ways of achieving the goals. But one thing is clear, there is a real consensus that net zero is in our future and Canada can do it. And I'm really proud of the fact that you're such a big part of helping us get there and through the Canadian Chamber. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Martha, for that very kind introduction and helping to set the stage for the conversation today. As you said, this is it's a critical conversation for Canada, especially with the government working towards delivering an updated climate strategy by the end of the month. As you said, there's a lot of ideas on the table, and it's important that businesses and policymakers find that balance of sustainability, reliability, affordability, while also being equitable. As you said, I'm involved from a GE Canada perspective, as well as the chamber, and it's all about how do we support getting to net zero, but in an economically competitive way. So some of the critical issues that we'll discuss over the next 45 minutes include technology, financing, and policy tools that will get Canada to net zero while also enabling economic growth. For those of you who have questions, we will have time at the end for Q&A. So I would encourage you to go to Slido and entering pound Canada 360. So without further ado, I'm pleased to have on the panel today, Michael Torrance from Bmo, Jillian Doran from Rio Tinto, Scott Maybury from the University of Toronto, and Anna Stukas from Carbon Engineering. So you want to hear from them. So we are going to dive right into the questions. What I will ask of the panelists is before they answer the first question, if they could just spend 1 or 2 minutes briefly introducing themselves. And Scott, we're going to start with you, if that's okay. So the first question is a meaty one. With a significant number of potential pathways towards net zero, the choices can be overwhelming for policymakers and businesses. How should we assess the feasibility of measures that will get us towards net zero? And building on what Martha said, how should Canada develop a national strategy given the regional economic realities? So Scott, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Scott Maybury. I'm the Vice President, Operations and Real Estate Partnerships here at the University of Toronto. I'm very deeply privileged to oversee planning and capital projects, new building. We have about $3 billion in motion at present. We have about 17 million square feet across our 3 campuses. I also am responsible for IT, ancillary services, budget, all that good stuff. And it's a large portfolio because the University of Toronto is a very large university. 95,000 students, 700 undergrad programs, 200 grad programs, Canada's top university and 18th in the world. And that includes privates. And we only look at publics, we're more like top 6 or 7. So we have and have carefully developed to the question, an ambitious target of being net negative institution by 2050. I usually talk about that as climate positive because we need to be positive. We are working to ensure that our continued growth and sustainability are compatible because we're actually planning on doubling the amount of square footage we have in buildings while hitting a net negative 2050 endpoint. So how are we going to do that? We are currently building Canada's largest urban ground source heat pump and a geo exchange system under King's College Circle. It's our 4th geo exchange system across the 3 campuses. We're launching soon our phase 2 of our Schwartz-Reisman Innovation Campus. Phase 2 is a big, very large bioscience building, lots of fume hoods, the kinds of things that make it challenging. But that building will be 20% more efficient than recent builds because we've upped our energy design standards. And we are, with the support of our deans, the folks who pay the bills, they are purchasing with their resources much more energy efficient buildings. Our approaches recognize that net zero targets need to look at technical, financial, and political dimensions together. This goes to the heart of your question, I think. We have created a new institutional strategic initiative around the climate positive question. That involves 90 PIs, principal investigators, 8 different academic divisions, 28 departments, made up of folks who will approach the technical, the financial, and the political in an integrated fashion, because we need to advance solutions that strengthen our region. An example is the Electric Vehicle Research Center, focused on next generation EV technologies to help power Ontario's auto industry. We've partnered with Havilar and Magna. INCIRC is funding part of this, and MyTax, which is just a great partner in doing this. We are also accountable because an institution like us, public, primary mission of teaching and research and learning and discovery, we have set that net negative target for 2050, but we have a $1.2 billion costed plan to hit that target. We know where those funds are going to come from, and we're already on the journey to get there. So for us, it's an integrated question, and it needs to be an integrated approach. And I think just making targets without plans wouldn't work for us. And that's why we have advanced this so far.
Thank you for that, Scott. Very insightful. I've noted the integration piece for sure. Jillian, do you want to share your thoughts, please?
Sure, Heather, thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jillian Doran. I am the CFO for Rio Tinto Aluminium. We're headquartered in Montreal, but I'm currently sitting in sunny Melbourne and hoping that the Wi-Fi doesn't let me down again. Rio Tinto Aluminium is one of the world's largest primary aluminium producers. We are globally based, but we have a significant presence in Canada and also Australia. So I think for from our perspective, we late last year, Rio Tinto globally made some really strong commitments about decarbonising our business. So we have committed to a 15% reduction in carbon emissions on a 2018 base by 2025. And we obviously have had to have significant progress on some of the programs and study to achieve 15% by 2025. We also have a 50%, so that's 50% target by 2030. And then of course, net zero by 2050. I think one of the things that we've needed to do, and we've needed to be really deliberate about, is incentivizing our business to actually accelerate some of those the carbon abatement programs. And that's being brought about by setting an internal carbon price. So we've set an internal carbon price of $75 a ton, and that's really to prioritize and incentivize the acceleration of those programs. We've also made a commitment externally around capital investment, so $1.5 billion in the next couple of years, and then $7.5 billion by the end of the decade. So there are very, very clear programs of work. And what we don't have is all of the answers. Some of the technological advancements that we need actually haven't been developed at this point. People are working really hard towards the development of those. And I think the key thing we need from policymakers, probably two key things. One is pricing carbon and setting that expectation around the cost of carbon and making that really clear. And the second piece is really incentivizing the bringing forward or the pace of the activities required to decarbonize. So really supporting that technology and innovation agenda with skills and resources that we're going to need in terms of people to actually support us along the way.
Thank you, Jillian. If you'll indulge me, I wrote down confident humility in having a plan, but appreciating that you don't have all the answers.
Absolutely.
In reaching that goal. I thought that was terrific. Michael, do you want to share some thoughts with us, please, from BMO?
Yeah, thank you, Heather, and thank you to the Chamber for organizing this session. I think it's fantastic, and I'm very honored to be part of this panel. So as noted, my name is Michael Torrance. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer at BMO, and I oversee the bank's sustainability program. One of the things that I had the privilege to champion last year was the establishment of BMO's net zero ambition. And so we're obviously very engaged on this topic of net zero, and being a bank we're focused not only in our own operations, we've actually been carbon neutral in our own operations since about 2010, and we purchase 100% renewable electricity since 2020. But we're now focused squarely, as the industry is more broadly, on financed emissions. And in that respect, we're thinking about this topic as it affects the entire economy of Canada and across North America. And so your question, I think, is really the critical question. This is a highly complex topic. And as we've dug deeper into our quantification of financed emissions, understanding decarbonization pathways and modeling, that complexity has become very evident. And I think one of the things that we'll have to really focus on is what exactly are the steps that we need to take to achieve this overall policy goal. We know where, we should be able to determine where emissions are coming from. Largely they're in real estate, energy, heavy industry, and automobiles, transportation. Then we have to think about what is the decarbonization pathway going to have to look like for us to decarbonize the economy, and what are the key drivers and technology shifts and investments that have to be made to achieve that objective. And then we have to figure out why are those technologies and transitions not taking place naturally. And there needs to be a really close dialogue between the private sector and government to understand what are the obstacles that are impeding our achievement of these goals in the status quo. And so again, I think it's going to then therefore be about understanding the nature and the scope of the challenge, having very clear lines of communication between policymakers and the private sector, and then being very systematic in terms of how we address challenges and overcome roadblocks to achieving our objective, and being very creative in terms of how we think about financing and innovating in order to achieve our net zero goals.
Thanks, Michael. So I think we'll all agree it's incredibly complex, but we do need a pathway, and that pathway has to be considerate of where we're starting from, all the different variables, all the levers to incent at speed, and then this constant collaboration. Like, nobody's going to be able to do this themselves, and we're going to need everybody all in working to collectively on that end goal. So thank you for that. Anna, certainly last but not least, from Carbon Engineering.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you to the Chamber for having us here today. My name is Anna Stukas. I lead our Canadian business development activities for Carbon Engineering. We are a Canadian clean energy company that is focused on the development and commercialization of technology to capture carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Once you've captured that carbon out of the atmosphere, you can do a number of things with it. First, you can put it back underground where it came from, creating permanent carbon removal, or what you might call a negative emission. You can also take that carbon and combine it with clean hydrogen to produce products like drop-in compatible fuels, aviation fuel, diesel, gasoline. When we think about how our technology can fit and the pathway to net zero, we think it's incredibly important to recognize that we need all of the tools in our toolbox to address the challenge of meeting net zero. And there's a danger in when you think about an abatement curve, and there are measures that we can take to decarbonize that save us money. There are measures that we can take that cost a little bit of money. And then as we get into the harder to decarbonize sectors, things like aviation, steel production, where the cost of getting to net zero increases significantly as we get into those hard to abate sectors. There's a danger in wanting to start over only with the easy stuff and then work our way up that curve. And I think one of the critical things is that we need to be working in parallel to develop solutions across the portfolio, including those hard to decarbonize sectors. And to do that, I loved what Michael was saying about, how do we navigate through that complexity and figure out the innovations that are going to help. I think it's also really important to note that policies are never going to be able to evolve to keep pace with the innovations. We are never going to be able to regulate at the pace of technology development. So it's critical that those policy targets and compliance assessments should be performance-based and technology agnostic, as policymakers can't predict what solutions might arise. And so we should look at incentivizing the outcome, not necessarily the means by which we get there. And then recognizing that the harder to decarbonize sectors are going to need different policy mechanisms than some of those sectors where the cost of decarbonization is lower.
Thanks, Anna. Great points on ensuring that we're creating policies that are performance-based and technology agnostic. I duly noted. So the next question I have builds on a little bit of what we've already started, and that concept of there is no silver bullet. So in that vein, what technologies is your company working on to play a role in getting us to both the 2030 targets as well as the 2050 targets? And Anna, maybe we'll just stay with you.
Absolutely. So, our direct air capture technology, when paired with sequestration to give you permanent carbon removal, is an incredibly powerful tool, because what it allows you to do is decouple your point of emission from your point of collection. So instead of, if you take the sector of aviation, for example, instead of having to decarbonize every single airplane, you can centralize your collection of your emissions, and then you can permanently remove them. You can also look at creating those drop-in compatible products. So again, to go back to aviation, it's not sufficient to simply continue on business as usual and remove or offset all of our emissions. We also need to look to transitioning to alternative sources of fuels, to sustainable aviation fuel. So our technology can help by providing scalable, affordable solutions that can fit with existing infrastructure. So we can create sustainable aviation fuel that is compatible with existing installed fossil fuel infrastructure and compatible with existing aircraft engines. That allows you to decarbonize without having to change over all of your infrastructure. We can then use permanent carbon removal to help to abate all of those residual emissions that you're still left over with at the end of the day. And we think this is an incredibly powerful tool, particularly for use in hard to decarbonize sectors.
Thanks, Anna. The concept like scalability, working with existing assets. I know we've talked about that repeatedly as part of the Net Zero Leadership Council. And certainly it's top of mind for those of you who had the chance to read the report that the Canadian Chamber just presented by NANOS, but with climate change being one of the top 3 challenges they see as potentially impeding Canada's economic growth. So thank you for sharing that. Michael, do you want to build on your earlier comments from Bmo, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So technology is obviously core, and a lot of my co-panelists will be focused on the actual technology for decarbonization and for taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, like carbon engineering. I'll focus on data, because data is a huge challenge for us in terms of our own net zero journey. We have a goal, and really our ambition around net zero is to be our client's lead partner in the transition to a net zero future. So in order to be that kind of a partner, we need to be a core advisor to them on the pathways that they can take in helping them with strategy and then financing those solutions. One of the things we did when we launched our ambition was to establish the Bmo Climate Institute. And that institute is meant to be a multidisciplinary institute that is focused on bridging policy, science, and finance. And so some of the things that we're looking at is the use of technology to be able to serve that function and to be the advisor that we want to be for our clients. A couple of key areas where we think technology will be helpful. One is around the impacts of physical climate risk. Net zero, obviously, we're focused a lot on transition, but there are realities that there is going to be climate change that cannot be mitigated and cannot be avoided. And there's going to be economic implications of that. And we've been piloting some very interesting technology that uses geospatial modeling leverages Google Earth technology. We're working with a company called Climate Engine that allows us to analyze different physical hazards that can be exacerbated by climate change that could affect different physical areas and therefore affect physical assets as well. And we're also looking at tools that we could use to help clients to organize and structure their thinking around decarbonization strategy, helping them quantify GHG emissions, helping them map out pathways to decarbonization, and using automation and technology-based solutions to help advise in that capacity. So there's a lot of roles that technology will play, and then there's a lot of challenges when it comes to data availability and data gaps, either even within our own processes that we probably haven't collected data historically that we will need to collect in the future, or the availability of data in the market. And just as a quick aside on that, we've done a lot of analysis recently through the Climate Institute on decarbonizing residential real estate. And we're going to be coming out with a paper in a few weeks that will discuss some of our findings. One of the major issues in Canada is that we actually don't really know a whole lot about the actual emissions profile of individual homes. In some jurisdictions, that information is widely available, and in ours, it isn't. So how do you even set targets? How do you even track and monitor your progress? That's an area where I think there's an opportunity for technology to provide solutions that will be really necessary for us to understand where we are and monitor where we're going.
Thanks, Michael. There was a lot there, and I won't do it justice, but I think just a reminder that while we're solving for net zero, don't lose sight of the fact that it is going to have, there are going to be effects that we need to consider in terms of our current infrastructure, and we can't lose sight of that. So thank you. And then certainly, Jillian, do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I think, this is it's super exciting, I think, for mining and metals industries, but also for the world. It's a complex problem to solve, as Anna mentioned. I think for aluminium specifically, we are a carbon intensive industry. The industry average is 17 tons of carbon per ton of metal. In Canada, we are starting from a really strong position, a real strength. And that is because we produce the world's lowest carbon metal out of Canada at 4 tons of CO2 per ton of metal. So significantly lower actually than the industry average. We also have pioneering technology underway in Canada. It's actually our pilot plant is based in the Saguenay. And that's a partnership with Alcoa, so one of our peer companies. And it is technology which would see us producing zero carbon aluminium, so taking carbon essentially out of aluminium altogether. And so it's a pioneering, as I said, and something that we are extraordinarily excited about. We reached a couple of key milestones late last year with the pilot that we've got, and now it's going to be about how we do that at scale. So still very early phases, still at the very early phase of development, but something that we're extraordinarily excited about for aluminium specifically. There are other technological advances that some of other companies and industries will be focused on. So we're looking at electrification of high pressure, high temperature units that we use in our manufacturing processes. We're also looking at hydrogen. And then of course, we're exploring carbon storage options. The key point, I think, is there is limitless technological advancements that we can make, but time is limited, and also the way we sort of support in terms of resource, both people and also funding. So trying to find that balance between technological advancement, pace, scale, and then obviously sort of shareholder return. So I think I guess I'd kind of wrap up by saying lots to be excited about, but also lots for us to work closely together on. And again, this kind of piece around partnership both with our industrial peers, governments, and communities and First Nations peoples as well, are all going to be part of that solution for us.
The piece that I'm always excited about is the Canada leadership. I think many people have heard me say this before. I think the energy transition is a wonderful opportunity for Canada to stand up on the leadership stage. But you're right, it's going to cost money, and funding is a big part of that, which is a great segue into the third question. It's going to take a tremendous amount of capital expenditure to get us to net zero. What are the investor expectations in terms of transitioning and related investments? And perhaps we'll start, Michael, with you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think from the investor perspective, there's really two key things that are noteworthy. One is investors increasingly are focused on the implications of climate risk, and they want to see that the investments that they're making, they want to understand how they're affected by climate risk, be it transition or physical. And there's a lot of work being done in the investment and financial sector to better understand those kinds of challenges and be able to analyze these kinds of risks. That kind of goes back to the data question that I discussed earlier. There's also, though, going to be an opportunity piece, and there's 150 trillion by some estimates of investments that will need to be made to transition to net zero. And so the investor community sees a lot of opportunity there. And so one of the things that I think we lack are good ways of identifying and refining and cultivating good investment opportunities towards the net zero transition. So I think there's a lot of capital that is ready to be investing towards this goal. We need better ways of identifying opportunities and supporting the growth of solutions, be it innovation or simply investment in decarbonization. And we need better ways of understanding the risks of action and the risks of inaction associated with climate, which I think will even spur further investment decision-making to move capital towards this transition that we want to see.
Thanks, Michael. Jillian, maybe from your perspective on the expenditures.
Yeah, so what we can see, I mean, it's very clear, shareholders expect the same rigor and integrity around reviewing capital allocation. And so we are committed to continuing to provide that rigorous approach to capital allocation within our business. If I think about, the sort of mention about the fact that you've got many, many opportunities, we still have a role to play in ensuring that where we do invest, it's for the right reasons and for the right returns. One of the things that we think very deeply about is that measurement of value. So the mechanisms to measure value traditionally or historically are about NPVs or IRRs. And we know within this new world, we need to be thinking about value in a different way. And value actually is about the sustainability, not just in sustainability as such, but actually the life and health of our businesses and our assets. And in many ways, we see the decarbonisation program as a mechanism to actually enhance the health and the life of those businesses, and therefore sort of protect those future cash flows. So I think for me, it's about maintaining the rigor around how we allocate capital, making sure that we invest in the areas with the best returns, and also making sure that we're looking at that value proposition in a more holistic way. So not just in the sort of black and white dollars or NPV, but actually thinking more holistically about communities, the length and health of our assets, and actually how that then translates into longer term shareholder returns rather than sort of the annual shareholder returns. And I think within that, then you'll satisfy the different types of investor that you'll have in a portfolio. Some of your investors are short-term investors and some are long-term investors. Decarbonisation is a long-term business value proposition. And so that's where our focus will be.
Much more, as was said earlier, outcomes focused.
Yeah.
Anna, you want to share maybe some thoughts from carbon engineering?
Absolutely. And I want to pick up on what Jillian was saying about that long-term piece, the long-term value. And I think particularly for nascent technologies like ours, and I should mention, we're not looking to single-handedly deploy our technology at climate relevant scale on our own. We have a licensed process business model. We're working together with partners like 1.5 in the United States and Huron Clean Energy here in Canada to deploy our technology at commercial scale. And to bring it back to that piece about that decarbonization being a long-term play, it's also critically important that we have policy frameworks that send strong long-term signals regarding decarbonization that are going to create an environment of investment certainty. As we look at creating infrastructure essentially for decarbonization, we're looking at infrastructure magnitude investments. For our technology, if we're taking CO2 out of the air and putting it back underground, you can really think about that as the air treatment infrastructure of tomorrow, similarly to how we had to develop water treatment infrastructure 200 years ago. So you need, in order to make those infrastructure scale investments, you need that investment certainty in order to attract the investors in, to allow the large firms and the large investors to confidently make the investments that are going to be needed to get to net zero and to make those investments today.
So investment certainty and predictability is key, and it underpins any business decision. And in the interest of time, that I'm going to take that, I'm going to pull on it, and we're going to go to the last question. And so hopefully we'll have a few moments for an audience question. But the government will be tabling its new climate change plan at the end of March. What needs to be in there to make this a success? So maybe Scott, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think we're seeing a very positive movement on recognition of the critical role of the university ecosystem in advancing really Canada's climate commitment. I would also say, Heather, on that question too, when you said there was no silver bullet, well, maybe because it's Olympics, I don't know if it's a silver bullet, but we actually think there's a golden bullet, and that is talent. The talent that universities and colleges across the country in their undergrad, grad, postgrad are developing, but also in their faculty members who evolve their talents as we go forward. We actually think that is part of the solution here, and whether it's in the classroom, and this is to your question as well, where can we go? We need to make sure government is supporting, the development of that talent. Whether it's in the classroom and learning green economy skills, or in the innovation side of this equation. The University of Toronto, with its partner hospitals, spends $1.2 billion a year on research. About 500 of that is here at the university in non-medical kinds of things. That generates significant innovation and intellectual capital and patent-ready stuff. We have turned out hundreds of startup companies out of the university. One recently that was a finalist in the Carbon X Prize, CERT Systems, to Anna's comment, this takes CO2 out of emission streams, out of a boiler, for example, and turns it into feedstock for materials, polymer materials. So even better than sticking it underground or burning it for another fuel is actually making useful stuff out of it. That aspect of actually the students and who make these innovations and discoveries, creating companies and bringing not only solutions to the market, but also value back to Canada, I think are a really important part of this equation. So the government can support that. The Low Carbon Economy Challenge recently opened, and it supports projects that will generate clean growth, reduce emissions, support innovation, and create long-term jobs. That's great stuff. Also hopeful to see government recognize the power of collaboration with industry through the Net Zero Accelerator. We are going to be dependent, and we're looking and talking to partners from both government and industry to help us meet our climate positive 2050 outcome. We seek partnerships to build student residences. We seek partners to build innovation spaces like a bioscience building in the medical world, but we're also seeking them in this space that we're talking about today. And I think this is not something that's partitioned from government to private sector to public sector, but it's a place where all three need to come together to bring our skills and our perspective, very much like the integrated answer I said before. There's financial, there's technical, there's social. This is not a super easy problem to solve. And as Ed said, I thought very interesting about, a couple hundred years ago, we had to worry about water that needed to be treated. Now we're looking at something else. It's going to take an integrated approach, and wherever government can help in that is going to be a net good.
Thank you. Jillian, maybe some thoughts for you for the government?
We have a long list. I could be here for a while, but we also have great support. So I'll probably start off by saying that. So they're active partners in our ELYSIS technology that I described earlier on. I think, the key thing, and I echo the talent piece, because we absolutely need the talent and the resource. What I would probably say, if I had one, is carbon pricing and competitiveness need to be complementary. So, Canada's leading the way, but there needs to be this recognition that there will be impacts on the industries that we operate while we're waiting for a level sort of global playing field. So, we need to watch carefully and then stay aligned with our trading partners to make sure that we do maintain that competitiveness on the global scale.
Thank you. Anna.
Thank you. And, echoing Jillian's piece about support from the federal government, I think here in Canada, one of the things that we do really well, picking up what Scott was saying as well, we have a very supportive innovation ecosystem that helps to develop nascent technologies. It's been incredible. It's been a huge part of our success to date, and it's something that we need to continue doing. Where we start to have challenges are on ensuring that those technologies that we've developed here in Canada can be commercialized here in Canada. And so creating and strengthening the policy frameworks that are going to enable that commercialization to happen here in Canada, I think would be incredibly valuable on our path to net zero. Some ideas on how we can do that, and these are really general principles, include that long-term direction on sector by sector emissions targets and the policy tools that are going to be used to create an environment of certainty, again, to foster that, the long-term investments that we need to decarbonize. We need tight targets by sector that will facilitate catalyzing decarbonization in the hard to abate sectors, in addition to enabling and incentivizing the easier to abate sectors to continue and deepen these decarbonizations. To this end, one specific example is we'd love to see the targets for the clean fuel regulation start to tighten over time, recognizing that might be a bit of a controversial statement, but it's something that we would love to see. And then specifically from a carbon engineering perspective, we would love to see a recognition of the role that permanent removals can play as a complement to all of the critical abatement activity that must begin to be deployed today in order for us to be able to scale to the level that both the IEA and the IPCC predict are going to be required for us to meet net zero. And to this end, we're looking forward to seeing the details around the investment tax credit for carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and support there for direct air capture, I think would be pivotal for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. And Michael, good, your wish list.
Yeah, well, I think I'm just going to echo all of the great comments that have already been made. I think one of the big things is going to be about having policy stability and predictability about how this is implemented. And I think there's ways for government to play a role to create that certainty and kind of underwrite the risks of change that will allow for planning to be happening now, that is going to really be, investment decisions made for decades into the future. And then, just so some of the work that I'm interested to see is how do we balance competitiveness, as Jillian was saying, with a credible, a science-based net zero transition. And, I'm looking to see what the work comes out of the net zero advisory body and how do we find that balance? I think Canada's on the cusp of really being a world leader in terms of actually creating a vision and having a plan to execute on it. I think, business, the private sector, government, academia are aligned on that objective. So now the question turns to how and how fast. And so that's there's definitely a role for government to overcome coordination problems that we're going to have in making those kinds of determinations.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and see if I captured everything. First of all, just a thank you to the government so far for the great support, and I can say certainly from myself, they've been a willing ear and have wanted to engage with industry on a number of fronts. So I think that's a very good sign and something to build from. This concept of a golden bullet being our talent, I would also concur that we sit on amazing talent in Canada, and they need to play a big role in this transition. And saying that, we have to protect that innovation ecosystem. We have to continue to fund it. We have to continue to foster it, but not just to the point of creating the innovation. Is how do we commercialize it? How do we get it to an adoption level in Canada and then start to share it with the rest of the world? That seems to be a bit of an Achilles heel for us. And just finding that balance, as you said, Jillian, in terms of making sure that whatever we do is through that lens of competitiveness. And while we want to be a leader and we want to certainly meet those energy transition goals, we have to do it that we play in a global sandbox. And it's important that we never lose sight of that. This concept of tight targets by sector and making sure that everybody understands the role that they play, and everybody has to be responsible and accountable to that particular role. And then finally, a couple of things, this concept of stability, certainty, predictability, technology agnostic, moving from a vision to an executable plan, and then not waiting for the perfect plan. Time is not our friend here, and we need to move now. So first of all, I want to say thank you to everybody on the panel for sharing your thoughts. I thought they were terrific, and hopefully everybody listening to today has learned a few things and feeling a little bit more optimistic about our path to net zero in Canada. And it takes leaders like you on the phone to be a big part of that. I have a public announcement, and that is, while this is the last panel of the day, please stay tuned. You have about a minute break, and then you get to rejoin for a fireside chat with the CEO, Perrin Beatty, and Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology, the Honorable Francois-Philippe Champagne. And he is certainly someone you don't want to miss today. So thank you again for joining us, and please return in about a minute or so. Take care.